Ladies and gentlemen, welcome or welcome back to yet another episode of the Youth Cafe podcast, and I'm your host, Shali Gemeli. Right about now, we are going to explore how Kina Kanu and Kadu connect with the Angokanayo Gen Z movement. So it's all about bridging the intergenerational gap by combining the wisdom of the past with the energy of the present to strengthen our democracy. Join us as we unpack this fascinating topic and explore how the past and present are shaping our future. Karibuni sana. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do, and any other information you'd like us to know about you.
Okay, my name is Terry Wambui. I am a youth advocate and a writer and poet with Rafinki.
Mwamburi Benjamin is my name. Once again, I work with Mzalendo Trust. I volunteer at Taifa Teule Network and a program called Shiriki, where I'm a facilitator. I'm a lawyer by training. So yeah.
Thank you. My name is Fiona Motembe. I am a policy practitioner by profession. I am also an NIMD Democracy Fellow and a Democracy Enthusiast. Asante.
Wow. So before we get into what brought us here today, to punguze tension. So what's the best advice you've ever received from someone from another generation, let's say someone older or younger than you, and any advice, whether about money, about life generally? Yeah.
I could start. There was a time I was working with the Kenyatta University Student Electoral Commission as a commissioner, and the director of security in KU told me that it is better to do something for nothing than nothing for nothing. Yes, so whether you're paid or not, do something, basically. Yeah.
Mine would be, it was a random person. They told me that these are my best years yet, that I should just relax in them, stop giving myself so much pressure. I'll never be 21 again. I get to be 21 only once.
Yeah.
Okay, for me it was always I've always been told by my grandfather that no matter where you fall, whether you feel like whatever you're doing currently doesn't match up to your standards or where you should be, just put your best in it. Do not just be lackluster because it's not what you wanted to do. Just put your best effort. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So we'd like to know what's bridging intergenerational gap on matters democracy. Yeah.
What it means.
Yeah. From your understanding.
It means bringing both the older generation and the younger generation to one table to discuss matters democracy and have a more of a cohesion, not demystify the stereotypes, the ageism attitudes that are revolving around democracy and these generations.
Yeah, just to pick up from what she said, I think it's just reconciling the differences and values and that different generations have, and perceptions and perspectives towards democracy, democratic institutions, and political processes. And the result of that, of course, is cohesion, as she's mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, I was just thinking that all of us have a theoretical idea of what democracy means, a rule by the people, for the people. And the third one is usually? By the people. Yeah. So, but when we come to the table, different generations have a different idea of what that means. So just picking up on what they both mean, that bridging the gap means us reconciling these ideas so that our idea of democracy works for us all. Because right now, while we have a common idea of what it means theoretically, practically we practice it differently, and we tend to have a different view of how to get there.
Oh, wow. So you've mentioned something about different generations having different views on democracy. So maybe could you expound on that?
Yeah, I can expand on that. So when we look at it, I tend to look at different generations politically. We have had different fixating moments in our history where we have all had something monumental happening, and that has shaped our idea of democracy. For example, if we look at the oldest generations, those who are around 60 above, they were all there maybe pre-independence and during independence and when we gained independence. So mostly their democracy revolves around that idea about us being one country ruled by ourselves. So they mostly tend to fixate on that, tend to fixate on leaders, on national cohesion. And so like a lot of times, for example, during this time when we were having maandamano, you would see that the older generation would tell people, tulieni mnataka kukata nchi. I don't know if you want to separate the country. Let us just be united, tusilete vita, because we achieved independence through vita, and I've come to realize those people are trying to avoid any conflict that might take us back there. Then you view the next generation that was there during Moi's one-partyism, and then they advocated for multi-partyism, and so they view it through the lenses of political parties. But even then, those political parties are not as united. They view it through tribal lenses. He party uakia this kabila. So even when we vote, we try to vote during those. You find that a certain political party has a lot of prominence in one region than another. Then the generation that came after was the one that was that came after all this and during the 2010 constitution. So they have an idea of how democracy can be issue-based instead of either tribal-based or anything based. And then the younger generation now advocates using technology. They want to use technology for everything. They have been called digital wankers, but even in their digital wanking, they are being able to achieve more through the use of technology.
Yeah, just basically what she said. So you have the boomers, yeah, between 1946 and 1964. They have come from a point of post-independence, a lot of instability, deaths in the clamor for independence. So then what they would wish to seek is, apart from self-governance as a country, is a lot of peace, a lot of stability. The generation that comes after, the Gen X between 1965 and 1980, they've realized the people who are leading us and the people who are quote-unquote getting rich and successful in the previous generation are those who were learned, those who took the white man's education. So then their view of democracy and democratic success is having leaders in place, but who advocate for education more. So then that generation is the generation that really focused on peace, stability, cohesion, but also education as a point of reference for leadership in the country. So they sort of settled because then there is a little bit more peace and stability. And then you have the millennials, who were the children mostly of boomers and maybe early Gen Xs. So millennials are coming into the space, but then they are coming after we've gotten self-governance and we are being corrupt. So there is a lot of corruption. And so that is where apathy starts to breed in. So a lot of mistrust in government and governance institutions comes in. They now dissociate themselves from that. Their main focus as a generation is economic viability. What are they advocating for using democratic processes and institutions now that they are learned? Remember, the previous generation was really focusing on education. They're advocating for gender equality. They're advocating for climate change and such like issues. And then you have Gen Zs, and Gen Zs came at a point of hyperconnectivity. A lot of technology in the world, there's globalization, etc. So then very informed, properly informed generation. But then further corruption, so further apathy, mistrust from government and government institutions, further democratic decline as a result of that. What are they advocating for? So then this is a generation that has a lot of information with a lot of naivety and audacity of youth. So then they want more transparency, more accountability. They have dissociated themselves from the system, so they do not necessarily ascribe to a box or to a system. They are more self-aware. The kind of rights that they advocate for are self-actualization rights, digital rights, mental health, and such like things. So as she's mentioned, very different interactions of democracy as a theory and concept as a result of historical context and even technological advancement. So yeah.
I'd pick on what he said. I'd divide them in three functions. The first generation, the boomers and the generation X, how they participate in democracy. They really view voting as their right and they understand it. They will vote. There's not apathy in terms of elections. And then we have the millennials and the Gen Zs, now the younger. They make up the younger generation of the country right now. There's a lot of naivety, as you said, apathy when it comes to the millennials. I feel they are very disillusioned by the fact that the system has failed them economically. So maybe they feel there's no need of a democracy. They're very undemocratic, if we could say that. Also, the younger generation want to participate in democracy in the how would I say, they're not very regular, non-conventional ways. Like for the older generation, it's just voting. When we vote, we are done. Ni mtu wetu ameingia, tushafunga. But the other ones, they want to follow up. They want to go to the barazas, the public participation. They want to go to the streets. They want to fight for their rights, which is something someone in the boomer generation will say, I don't want to do that. Ita haribu inchi. So they also participate differently in democracy as per the different generations.
I believe we acknowledge that different generations have different belief systems, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where intergenerational dialogue comes in, because now we need to think towards the same direction, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the importance of intergenerational dialogue?
I could go. Yeah. The importance of the intergenerational dialogue is one, there's a lot of understanding and cohesion and a lot of demystification, because then this generation views this generation as this generation views this generation as this, but a lot of those views are very stereotypical. So then we view the older generation as a generation that's settled, that, you know, you guys got your leaders, corruption came into our governance institutions, you didn't fight it, settled. But then through intergenerational dialogue, you realize, wait a minute, this is the generation that, if it's the earlier generations, the boomers, they fought for the independence of the country. If it is the generations that came later on, they fought for multi-party. They fought for what we now have, the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which is a product of clamor for social reform for the longest time, the 80s and 90s, the original Sabasabas and whatnot. So you understand that they didn't necessarily settle, they just fought, but you know, the older you get, the less receptive you are to change. So then millennials also, you understand where they're coming from. A lot of corruption, no jobs post-school, and whatnot, what they're fighting for, equal pay, because then you realize, I want to dissociate myself from the system, given that I'm a product of a failed system. So then there is cohesion, there is understanding, and there is respect of what each generation brings to the table. Because I believe personally, once you understand history, which is, you know, repeats itself a lot, then you're able to even plan for the future and have sustainable solutions. Right now, after post-protest, if we want solutions for what can we do as Gen Z, as millennials, we go back to our history, we look at what did they do. Post the Sabasabas, they went back to the drawing board. They had a draft constitution. They wanted electoral reforms and they were very detailed about it. And so that gives you solutions for your phase one of clamor for social and economic reform and phase two, and realize that what works for phase one does not necessarily work for phase two. So then what can we do? So then, yeah, a lot of sustainable solutions and understanding and cohesion between the two, all the generations, I'd say, yeah.
I'd say one of the importances is it helps in effective policy making. When we have effective intergenerational dialogues, we're able to get the views of each generation, what they want their future to look like, and we can design policies as per these needs. So policies will be designed in mind with the intergenerational mechanisms that are required. and it will also now empower each generation to have better equal opportunities. You see, for the older generation, they wanted peace, they wanted education, they wanted good health. Us, we want digital rights, jobs, everything. So all of us live in a community where the solutions and the policies are very sustainable and everyone gets to win, not just one person or one generation. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'll mention two importances. For me, the first one is okay. Let me first leave the first one because it has just escaped my mind. But the second one is about bridging the digital gap that we have. So right now, when we talk about democracy and how we participate, we were talking about like the younger generation using social media more. The older generation was more used to traditional barazas. They were more used to radio. And right now, unless we can be able to harness the power of the two, there's a certain miscommunication that happens, because while we can go on X and then we can talk about all these solutions that are there, how we can move to the next phase, as they were both talking about, and how we can be able to harness certain solutions to work for us, the way we communicate it also can alienate or can bring us together. If you look at how we talk about certain issues, how we develop hashtags, that was where there was like, how do hashtags help? So okay, hashtag Yaruto must go. How is it helping? And the older generation, us, we will talk about, I don't watch news, I don't listen to the radio. So how can we be able to harness the two so that they can be able to work for all of us? Is there a space for youth on radio? Is there a space for youth on TV? Even not radio like the NRG, the modern ones. Can we go to Wemwaro? Can we go to Inoro and be able to see the youth being able to be represented more instead of the older voices every time taking advantage? Is there a way the youth can be able to not teach, but like the way we teach our parents how to use their phones or their social media? Is there a way we can be able to help them to see what is the importance of them being able to participate even through social media, or how those views can be able to translate to them peer? Which I can already see being done. Some people are already taking the views, all the things that we've been speaking about on social media to the ground, to the people themselves, and telling them that, this and this is happening in your country. Is this what you want to continue? Huku kwa ground ama kwa radio mnaitwa mama mboga na nini, mnaambua system itawakula, social media tunaambua vitu zingine, even though mnataka iwork. Juku, they will come and tell you these things they do post on social media because it is also a selling point for them, but they are posting with all these things that this is where we see. Tunaona picha za Ruto amevaa viatu za crocodile zenye tunaambua sijui ni maelfu ngapi, sijui mtu mwingine nini Obina amepost kwa social media, kwa YouTube ama kwa nini, huyu Sudi akimwambia hii saa ni 900,000 ama alikuwa anamshow hivyo. Yeah, sometimes the people on the ground do not know these facts. When they are told, I'm like, you're a mama mboga, they do not know that. It is just language that is just being used to entice them. So yeah, the importance of this, it helps to bridge the digital gap.
Wow. So now that we've gotten to understand the importance of intergenerational dialogue, so far so good. It's been quite hard, right? Considering the Gen Zs have been saying hawataki tena kupatana and with these politicians and all that. So how can we now bring the Gen Zs and the millennials on board? Wakae chini waongee. Yeah.
With politicians or with themselves?
With themselves, let's just say millennials and all these generations. Yeah. Okay. How can they come together to strengthen democracy?
So I think how we can have all these generations sit at the same table is one, an understanding of having a forum and a form of media that is accessible and convenient to all generations. Number two is understanding that intergenerational dialogue isn't one generation talking to another generation in a condescending tone, or in a, I have wisdom, I have knowledge, you're naive, you're fresh, sort of a structure. But understanding that all generations bring value to the table, and it is the different perspective that shape democracy right now. People keep saying that the youth are not willing to sit at the table. It is a lie. We are willing to talk, we're just not willing to be talked to, especially by people who have no moral fabric to talk to us. So then we are demanding that when we sit at these tables, so-called intergenerational tables, we have a lot of transparency and accountability. We know the kind of people who fought for our country, who fought for reform in the 80s and 90s. Why don't we have the likes of Timothy Njoya, sitting and sharing their wisdom with us, and us giving our perspectives to them. But instead, who do we have? Leaders who are corrupt, just older. So then it's called intergenerational dialogue. So I think, yeah, just different perspective, different approach.
For me, I'd say having a long-term strategy. One of the ways would be a holistic approach to civic education, because now you get to educate the younger generation on the importance of actually being active citizens from a younger age, so that from then on they can be able to come up with, even when they are called to the table, they have an idea of what the older generation is saying, because there's a lot of naivety around it. We don't understand where they're coming from at some point. Their land rights, for example, then they view land as it's an asset. And anyone that, most of the politics is designed along such issues, land and everything. So understanding where they're coming from and even them getting to welcome us onto those tables would be very essential.
Well, so for us to really succeed on holding intergenerational dialogues, first of all, we'll really need to demystify or to address the myths and misconceptions surrounding intergenerational dialogue. So are there any misconceptions that you know of so that we address them?
Yeah. There are several misconceptions going both ways. So one of the ways I've seen is the misconception from the older generation towards the younger generation mostly involves around them. Mostly like, okay, when smartphones came into, when they, when like they end in the postmodern world right now, where we now are using smartphones, the world is becoming more globalized. A lot of the youth have a lot of things happening on their phones. Like personally, I usually do say that a lot of my life is on my phone. Like you can't see my phone away or me not trying to check my phone as frequently as possible. Before, my parents used to, of course, have an issue with that. Like, you're constantly on your phone. Why don't you do something else or something? So even when we decide, okay, maybe my activism is going to happen with me using my phone, I'm going to use either my Twitter to scream or my WhatsApp status or something, someone will be like, you're not going to the ground. There's a lot of that. Before like this protest, there was that word keyboard warriors. That's the only thing you do is on the phone. You don't go to the ground. You don't go to vote like the way we did. And so the one of the biggest misconceptions that I personally think has existed from the older generation to the younger generation is that we are lazy or not willing to do anything because we want to do a lot of things in digitally. Sindio. And then from the younger generation to the older generation, like personally, I would think that they ran down the country. Like when we gained independence, they had a lot of time and everything to take the country where it was supposed to be. But then a lot of things, they condoned corruption. They are okay with it. They're okay with mtuetu. They don't care if there's theft happening or corruption. So long as our person is there, we are benefiting. But are the benefits coming to your region? No. But so long as our person is there. So they do condone corruption. They accept being part of it. They view you succeeding as being able to benefit from those fruits of corruption. And so that is one misconception that exists from the younger generation to the older generation. I think I'll leave there.
Yeah, another misconception is that intergenerational dialogue is one generation talking to another generation. It's not. It is all generations talking. One generation shares their wisdom and knowledge and all. We bring really fresh perspectives, new perspectives and ideas, a lot of innovation even with the approach to democracy and, how we can disseminate, say, civic education. We would probably be more tech savvy to do civic education virtually through webinars and all. They would be, more inclined to legacy media and, the social caucuses and structures that exist in our communities, kinachama, kanisani and all. And if we have collected efforts, it can make a difference, but it's a huge misconception about intergenerational dialogue. Another misconception is that these generations can't see eye to eye or, speak and listen and be listened to. It's not, because these are our grandfathers, our parents, our older siblings and all. And we understand each other and we have our points of convergence and divergence, but more often than not, we know where the other person is coming from. And so if that can happen, then surely intergenerational dialogue can happen.
Another misconception is that the youths are not as knowledgeable, therefore they cannot bring substantial change or substantial ideas. And that's why we have a lot of, I would say, political tokenism, where like you're in a table just to be seen, to look pretty, to be seen. You're not supposed to, you can engage, but just usionge sana.
Low-key.
Ujui, we funzwa, sindio? Like you're not supposed to give ideas to come up with an idea, a strategy. Therefore, there's not effective youth leadership. It reflects as not as non-effective youth leadership right now. So that's one of the misconceptions. And I feel if, just in a nutshell, I feel if we demystified all these misconceptions and build intergenerational dialogue, we can break the weaponization of politicians. They weaponize in the elderly vote. They try to, they don't do campaigns for us. They campaign for our parents. They want our parents to go. Like, it's not about you. You guys are just there to follow the trails on the campaign period, but they know how to work ground vote. So we'll break that weaponization once we get together.
Okay. So when she was talking about political tokenism and the way you're just there to be seen, not heard, I remembered one advice I've received several times, because sometimes when you're very vocal or loud, people can view you as aggressive. So you're told, ukienda kwa hiyo meza nyamaza, jifanye mjinga, because the moment you speak up, they dismiss you, and then they're like, we don't want you on our table. Someone else told me, do not consider yourself an activist, because that immediately makes sure that you don't get any opportunities, because the moment those older people, whether in politics, they either think you want to weaponize activism to get money for yourself, or you're already too loud and you are troubled. So even the youth are not involved because as involved as that, because now there's also that also carries the other gap she was talking about, that even if the older generation go and vote, they're not so vocal about their rights or when they see that, or about transparency and accountability. As a youth, when you sit on that table, you're already screaming for such things, and then that is when now they want to cut you off, because already unachachisha vitu instead of just letting things go the way they're supposed to be.
Okay, now that you've mentioned a challenge that is there in this space in this civic space, are there any other challenges that people face while trying to hold intergenerational dialogues?
Yeah, I would say there are very many challenges that we have encountered, or that usually happen during intergenerational ones. And I believe one of them goes back to what you was talking about, the aspect of one generation talking down on another generation without letting them bring any substantial content to the table. So you find that locks out some voices, and most of the times the voices that are locked out are the youth voices, because if we are in a certain space, or even when we are trying to campaign, or even when we are nearing elections, only one generation is viewing that they know what is good for the country, and so you should let them tell you what is good for the country. It means that your views are not as heard, because look at the different things we were talking about. Fiona was talking about how land rights are considered differently. There's a reason for that. The tradition, before we got into urbanization properly, when we view boomers and Gen X, we were situated in our own land. Sindio. The politics of that time, what was happening then was during the Mau Mau uprising, during the redistribution of land during the colonial era, a lot of people lost their land. So land is very important in their conversations. To us, land might not be as important, because we have either grown up in urbanized centers, either brought through education or employment. We are trying to fight for employment and everything. Right now, as a person, I'm supposed to be thinking about how to be fully independent, how to be able to maybe either also be fully independent economically, etc. And when those are the concerns I bring to the table, but every time we have manifestos or we have people talking about what we need in the country, they're talking about their centralized issues from what they relate with, and they are saying that your views are not as important. They know what is good for the country. It locks you out. That is why we continue having rampant unemployment. We are having education. We are being told to go to school. These are the offered courses, but when you come, maybe there's no position for those. We are being told that other countries have labor for you, but then you're like, no, I just want to stay here. I have the expertise. Personally, I am a teacher by profession. I can go to the classroom and take expertise. I know how I would be able to teach but then they are telling you your issues are small. End up with JSS with 17K inakutosha wapi Nairobi jamani. Yeah, so I feel like the way we continue locking out the voices and concentrating on just certain it continues widening this gap, and it continues making us more resistant towards listening to each other.
Yeah, I think also another huge challenge is that intergenerational dialogues have been left to only civil society, that they should curate and execute them. But it should be a reflection of our society. It should be when there's a meeting kwa kijiji, who attends the meeting, who is called to the meeting, who is listened to, yeah? When there is, say, when there is community land and there's a community land committee, who is in that committee? Is it only the older generation or are younger generations in the committee? So then the aspect of it being intergenerational should be reflected across all spheres of our community, as opposed to it being left as work that the civil society does, to make sure that democracy, which is this skeleton and theoretical concept, proffers. Yeah.
I'd say for me, one challenge is accountability is seen as a pipe dream by both generations. They don't think they can hold, your MP, your MCA accountable. It's a far-fetched dream, and therefore it perpetuates like the lack of respect for civil rights, the lack of respect for separation of powers, and all that stuff, making in a holistic manner it ails the whole democratic system.
A bit when we were coming with Fiona, there was one point she was mentioning, and that was about political parties, and that I wanted to frame that point in entrenched political structures right now, where the older generation continues to think that the power should be held by the older generation because they are more experienced, or they have more wisdom. That is where we still have people vying and getting these important positions, even in their 70s and 60s, and the youths are completely left out. They are not even completely left out from holding any political powers. They also held out, even in political parties. That was the point you were mentioning, that even when we have positions where youth should occupy in political parties, they are completely ignored. And even if there's that power, there exists that position, they are not there to have any meaningful contribution. And I feel like even right now, the fact that we see a lot of apathy, there was a time I attended a certain by Twaweza, a certain event they were holding about voting and the youth, and they were asking who wants to see change, and all the youth raised their hands, and then they asked who wants to be part of change. Do you view yourself as vying for a certain position so that you can bring about that change? There were like only 2 hands raised up, and we were very many people. And so they say that that was one of the issues like we have right now. And I feel like it is also learned, because we have already been socialized to see that these positions are held by older people. They are held by someone who is already too old, like your grandfather or your father or your uncle. There's no position for me there, which is also again perpetuated by how Kenyan politics work. It works through how hefty your pockets are. Can I go back to my home and stand to be an MP if my pockets are not weighty enough to be able to give people, because people still want to be convinced through you giving them money. Unataka nikupe kura yangu na hata 50 huku nirushi. So those are some of the challenges we are facing right now, that we view powers belonging to a certain generation, and so the other generation either does not take part in also trying to be part of change, or they are systematically locked out.
Just to add, I feel when we talk about the younger generation, we put them in one box. There are 2 groups. We have the millennials and we have the Gen Zs, and all of them have different beliefs, different strengths. So when it comes to political parties, we're told this one is a young person, 35. Like, where is my 25-year-old? Someone who understands what I am going through at this time of my life as a 25-year-old. He went through different challenges when he was 25 that are no longer there, that I am now facing, that weren't existing at that time. So we have to have a reflection, a representation of both the subgroups in the younger generation narrative. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of political parties, are you guys planning to vie in 2027?
I am willing to serve my people, but in the right political structure and fabric. My underpinning value is integrity in politics. If I vie in 2027, I will not bribe any voter. But then will Kenyans be ready for that? So yeah, with the right political structure, fabric, and political party, because I'm yet to see a political party that is pegged on the ideology of integrity, then I will vie for political seat. Yeah. Probably, given my background in law and policy making, maybe, yeah, an MP. Yeah.
How about you, Fiona?
Not vie essentially, but participate in the nitty-gritties of the whole political party system. Like joining one and being behind the scenes. Yeah.
Personally, I don't feel ready to vie yet, but I am planning to be very instrumental in how people from my own place vote. I'm from Karuruma, which is in Ronyenja's constituency, and I was saying that I will go there, and even if I will have to beat people, I will beat people, because we are not going to make the same mistake. The amount of civic education I will conduct there, tutaenda hiyo mambo ya kura yako ni siri yako. We are not going to vote for losers anymore, because there's a road there that I have lived there for over 10 years. No, 15 now. Hiyo barabara hujaa vumbi. Politician akitaka kutuconvince anaweka ile mara low grade kabisa, within 2 days vumbi pro max. We don't want that anymore.
Umeamua kusema ukweli. Okay, so now that we've mentioned the challenges previously, are there any solutions that you have in mind?
Yeah. There are several solutions. I'll start with the concept of the fact that barazas exist. We can still utilize the existing systems. We just have to find a way to bridge them. So we have had traditional barazas. Mostly the people who have attended them have either been Gen X or boomers. For me, the one solution I think is finding space for the youths in those barazas. We can have intergenerational conversations happening there. While language barrier might be a problem for most people who might not know about the local languages and they are used there, we can try and see if we can also incorporate more languages for use in such barazas, and so that we can be able to talk properly, discuss our issues well, and find a common solution and a common way to go about them. So the other one, when we were talking about the digital gap, I was thinking, I'm not sure, because when Momburi was talking, he said, I can't take my grandfather and e-newspaper and I so my physical newspaper. But I was wondering if there's a way we can bring the older generation into our existing online spaces and everything. When we are talking about the historical context, about the fact that the things they went through, how they were able to overcome them, and the methods they used, can we bring them, maybe if we are creating YouTube videos, can we bring the older generation, like in this podcast, where they can talk about such, bring their experience on board so that it can interact with us, clearing misconception and any demystifying information that has existed. So yeah.
First, I think I would want to see it from a point of change, that intergenerational dialogues are also led by youth. That we also convene intergenerational dialogues and now call the older generations to the table. Instead of trying to occupy tables which have systemic hurdles, why don't we make our own tables and call these generations? So that could be an easy and a quick win solution to some of the challenges that have been raised here.
Mine is on the political spaces, the political parties. They should have mandatory quotas that are supposed to be led by youths, and I feel also to further emphasize on that, it should reflect on the subgroups of the youths. Yeah.
So previously you mentioned something on the digital space. So considering there is digital divide, how will we bring marginalized communities on board?
Community radios. Maybe.
Yeah, just speaking from what she said, I think there is space for us to incorporate both legacy and digital media. Why would I say that? If I attend, say, this podcast, most probably it is the younger generation who listen to it. How do we translate this in a form of media that then reaches the older generation? If I go to legacy media, a TV show, community radio, as she's mentioned, we can easily clip that into TikToks. So then it's having a point of convergence between legacy media, digital media, then you bridge the intergenerational gap. Such like things I think provide very conclusive solutions.
Okay, I was thinking about it in terms of infrastructure when you mentioned marginalized communities in, for example, regions that do not have easily accessible internet or smartphones or computers where they can be able to access this information. So maybe I would like one of the other guys to maybe talk about how we can bridge that infrastructural gap, because that feels systemic in a way.
Actually, that was the question.
It feels systemic. And I wanted to mention, but then already, like when we are talking about this conversation, I'm also considering whether we are talking about the existing systems have been working. So there was this move to make sure that there's maybe an ICT hub in every region. For example, in my upcountry, there's that Ajira ICT hub. I don't know if we can call it ICT hub per se, but it's a space where people can go and use government-owned computers with government-owned internet. So the reason why probably I'm having a bit of difficulty addressing that question the way it's supposed to be, it's because there are already existing systemic failures. Probably there has been corruption involved with setting up these regions, because I know these are regions that have been budgeted on. They do talk about putting or like installing internet or Wi-Fi in common places like markets and everything. But personally, I haven't seen that working. So I don't know. Do you guys see any way we can overcome that systemic failure?
I'm also thinking at it from a point of faction that is often left out, persons with disability. When you speak of even marginalization, kuna wenye wameomoka, youth, women, and then there is PWDs, and there are layers of marginalization that we can't absolutely compare. So then even when we have podcasts, when we have these conversations in barazas, how many village barazas have sign language interpreters? How many podcasts have been transcribed? So then infrastructure from a point of media, and then the systemic failures, I think it would take a lot, and change would start from even the ballot. Because then these systemic failures would still exist if the system, and the system being a corrupt system, still exists. So trying to, at the moment, mitigate the system, work with what we have, but then building towards changing political system and eventually our infrastructural system,
I'd say we have a long way to go in the marginalized sector. Because, for example, in the northeastern part of Kenya, for example, politics is clan-based. How do you permeate that and start talking about democracy or to see with him to wetu? You see, it's more than just, it's a lot. It's a whole systemic change that needs a lot of commitment by the local leaders, for example. The young generation from those parts, I think they should also be at the forefront in advocating for change in their regions, because theirs is kind of different. It's a bit hard to permeate that because it's about clans. The stronger clan gets the political vote. So, yeah.
But while we are mentioning that, and we're talking about like such a region, I can understand how hard it can be to permeate such regions. For example, in marginalized societies where already like probably there are efforts or there are ways we can do that. If we are talking about systems already exist, we have the internet, we have the smartphones, and it's a conversation that is led by the youth. I believe that we can be able to get into that, because for example, there was this time when we were trying to illuminate like what is happening in such regions, and there was widespread corruption, widespread misuse of money. When you bring to the fore, or when you talk to your parents or your grandparents and you're telling them, yes, I know this is our person, but do you know what has been happening with your money? Do you know where it has been going? And we are trying to bring to tell them like the facts. This corruption has been going on. What Murara has been doing, going around the country showing that alikwambia nakujengea barabara, alieka 4.something billion, haijaijenga hiyo barabara. Now it stops people from being like, wow, I'm not even benefiting from this. My students are going in a rundown school. The barabara that used to go to hospital is so bad that a lot of it, maybe there have been a lot of casualties and deaths already happening, even if we want to access certain facilities. So when such facilities are in place, I don't see any hardship personally, because we're able to talk to such people and they're able to see, look at what we did. Whatever we did was so monumental during the protest and when we were now leading the activism. I went back home, and while I was around the town center, I was talking to the people there, the older generation, the Gen X and boomers. And man, those people are as angry as they are. Like, even when they were telling us to lieni, litini amani, for once they see what has been happening. For once they see that things are wrong, we don't have to accept them. You tell them that this tax rise is going to affect you in this certain way, they get angrier. You tell them that hii barabara unajua ilikuwa imewekewa budget, they get angrier. So the next time we go to the ballot, we have an easier job. And maybe we can try to tell them that if we want to know more about this, like when we were talking about changing the ballot, that already helps us before we get to changing the systems, ensuring marginalized areas are able to be reached properly. But again, I also think that if we are talking about the digital divide and reaching marginalized areas, the youth, like Fiona was suggesting, are going to have to lead the conversation.
Yeah. Do you guys believe corruption will one day end? Like just someday? Is it possible?
Yes, I personally think that it will end, but we'll have to take a very radical view over dealing with corruption, because right now corruption is dealt with like just something. When we talk about crimes, some crimes are dealt with heavily. Like if we look in our past, how many corrupt leaders have been convicted of their crimes? When has it been like taken place in a short period instead of years and years and years of dragging on? Currently, I feel like the reason why corruption still continues to be an evil in society is because we are doing nothing with corrupt officials. We are not stripping them of all their wealth, making sure it is returned to the nini. When we were talking, I remember, I know it sounds naive, I remember that statement you said, that was like, when we were talking about borrowing from IMF, and then we are like telling IMF, you give us this amount of money, we are telling you it hasn't worked. Take those politicians, take their wealth, repay you. It is naive because the system won't work like that. But is there a way we can be able to do that, show them that there is no place for corruption? There are countries where, like I was watching a Scandinavian country, and a cabinet secretary was talking about, let me use that term, or minister, was saying that was resigning because their kid used the government issued iPad that he had been given. Just such a small crime. You don't even need to be forced out of that seat. You resign. They talk about in China that are corrupt officials beheaded or what happens. Me, I'm all for radical things. The amount of theft that has gone on requires that radical move. We shouldn't talk about their human beings. Probably they should just be convicted legally.
Bombastic side that.
Yeah, for me, I view corruption as a challenge even on my part. It starts with me. It's the tujiangalie kind of thing. I don't want to point fingers. I want to first start pointing finger at me. Because then I keep saying our national ethos is a live document. So it's, corruption when it comes to elected officials and whatnot, who, by the way, bribed us to get there. And then it's connections when it comes to me. And then when it permits to the churches, it's God's grace. You get?
Okay. Wow. So as we conclude, what's one takeaway message that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd start. I'd say it's time. It's about time. The more we keep on lagging behind, we are creating a very dangerous path for the future generation. So it's about time we step up in our own little spaces, as a civic educator, as a politician. It's about time we make our little change right now.
Viva.
I'd start by saying we form 75% of the electorate as youth. 75% of the electorate. That's how much power we have. Even without the registered, the ones who are yet to register as voters. We can't continue feeding into our own marginalization. We need to realize that what has happened is we've just been rained on. We are just victims of a failed system. We shouldn't be the failed system. Ni paka tu ni simba tu amenyeshewa, si paka. Yeah.
Okay, personally, I would end by saying that we have to call upon our different experiences. If we bring them together, we're able to create a solution that works for everyone, that we are diverse, and whether it's ethnically or anywhere, and if we've been able to harness that in the past, we can be able to also harness our diversity to be able to bring change. So yeah, let us be inclusive, because as I was looking, that probably when we were doing what they have been calling the Gen Z protest or the youth-led protests, it was mostly like relegated to the youth, and somehow I don't want to say that it didn't fail. It was a success because we have been able to awaken. I don't think there's the same apathy that was there before. But yes, it awakened among the youth. But what about the older generation? Were we able to harness their resources so that maybe we can be able to have something that works for everyone? So yeah, I would call upon just inclusivity.
Wow, beautiful insight. So before we sign off, our listeners would like to maybe follow you and connect with you via social media. So could you please share your social media handles?
Okay, on Twitter, Instagram, I go by Phoenicia Child. Phoenicia is from the name Phoenix, and then with a Shia at the end, that's Phoenicia Child. So yeah, I can be found like that. I can be found through those handles. I sometimes usually say Phoenicia because when you're trying to explain to someone what you mean, it can be complicated. Yeah.
On Instagram and X, it's Kinya_Motembe. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, on all platforms, I'm Mwamburi BO. On Instagram, there's Instagram name and username. Yeah, sindio, huwa kuna hizo mbili. One of them is Kahawa Tungu, which is my pen name because I do write blogs and all. But the other one is Mwamburi BO still.
Oh yeah, there will also be the username Terry Wambui. Phoenicia Child is just the handle.
Okay. So thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your valuable insights. Together, let's keep striving for stronger, more inclusive democratic processes. So to our technical team, thank you so much for coming through for us. And to our people, thank you so much for sticking with us to the end. Please subscribe to our channel, like, share, and comment on the kind of topics you like us to discuss and the guests you'd like us to bring on board. Until next time, bye.